You were taught that the Russian Revolution happened because of bread riots and Bolshevik ideology, but before Lenin ever took power, the Russian Empire had already destroyed itself, with gold. In 1897, Russia adopted what economists called the most conservative monetary system in Europe. 28 years later, the empire no longer existed. This isn't about politics. This is about what happens when a government mistakes stability for strength. And once you see what really happened, you can't unsee it. Welcome to the wealth timeline, where money, power, and history quietly shape the world around us, because the fall of the Romanovs wasn't decided in Winter Palace. It was decided in the Ministry of Finance, decades before the first gunshot. Picture Russia in the 1890s, the largest land empire on Earth, 125 million people, resources beyond measure. But economically, fragile. Foreign investors didn't trust the ruble. Capital fled to London and Paris. Industrial expansion stalled because no one wanted to hold Russian currency long enough to build a factory. So Finance Minister Sergei Witte made a decision. Anchor the ruble to gold at a fixed rate. Make it as solid as a British pound. Force credibility through scarcity. On paper, it worked. Foreign investment poured in. Railways expanded. Steel production doubled. What no one noticed was the cost. The gold standard wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated response to a real crisis. In the 1880s, Russia's paper currency had collapsed in value. Inflation eroded savings. The state couldn't borrow abroad. Witte understood that without monetary credibility, Russia would remain economically irrelevant. So in 1897, he pegged the ruble to gold. 1 ruble equaled 0.774 grams of pure gold. No flexibility, no exceptions. The assumption was simple. If Russia disciplined its monetary policy, prosperity would follow, and for a decade it did. Foreign loans financed the Trans-Siberian Railway. German capital built textile mills in Moscow. French investors funded oil extraction in Baku. But the gold standard came with a hidden constraint. Russia could only print rubles if it held equivalent gold reserves. That meant the money supply was fixed, regardless of how fast the economy needed to grow. It worked, but only under conditions that would not last. By 1904, Russia looked like a success story. Industrial output had grown 40% in 7 years. St. Petersburg rivaled Vienna in grandeur. The empire projected power from Warsaw to Vladivostok. But beneath the surface, the gold standard was tightening like a noose, because Russia wasn't just industrializing, it was militarizing, and war is expensive. When Russia went to war with Japan in 1904, the government needed to spend massively. But under the gold standard, it couldn't simply print money, it had to borrow. In foreign currencies at high interest rates. The war was a disaster. Russia lost, and the loans came due. Then came 1905. Strikes, uprisings, the first tremors of revolution. The government needed money to restore order, but the gold standard meant it had 2 options: raise taxes or borrow more. Both were politically suicidal. Here's the unintended consequence. The very system designed to create stability now prevented the state from responding to crisis. The stronger it became, the harder it was to stop. By 1914, Russia faced a choice it couldn't avoid. World War I had begun. France and Britain, Russia's allies, were hemorrhaging men and money. The Eastern Front stretched across 1,000 miles. Supplying an army that size required resources Russia didn't have. The government tried to hold the line. It borrowed, it taxed, it requisitioned grain, but the gold standard wouldn't bend. Because here's what matters. Under a gold-backed currency, you can't inflate your way out of a war. You can't print rubles to pay soldiers unless you have the gold to back it. So Russia did what desperate governments do. It started printing anyway. By 1916, the ruble-to-gold peg existed only on paper. In practice, the currency was collapsing. Inflation hit 20%, then 40%, then higher. Soldiers weren't paid. Factories couldn't get raw materials. Bread lines stretched through Petrograd. And still, the government insisted the gold standard was intact. Nothing collapsed. And that was the problem. February 1917, Petrograd, minus 12 degrees Celsius. Women waiting in bread lines for the 4th day in a row. The immediate cause of the revolution wasn't ideology, it was purchasing power. Because the ruble, the currency that was supposed to be as solid as gold, had lost 60% of its value in 3 years. Workers couldn't buy food. The middle class saw their savings evaporate. Even the military struggled to supply its own troops. On February 23rd, International Women's Day, factory workers walked out. Not because of Bolshevik agitation, because bread cost more than they could earn. Within a week, the Tsar had abdicated. The provisional government took over. And one of its first decisions? Abandon the gold standard. But by then, it was too late. because the monetary crisis had already destroyed the legitimacy of the state itself. Once people stopped believing in the currency, they stopped believing in the institution that issues it. From this point on, the outcome was no longer optional. Here's what the gold standard actually did. It forced Russia to choose between military survival and monetary discipline. It couldn't have both. Britain and France could run deficits because their empires provided collateral. Germany could mobilize industrial capacity. The United States entered late and had gold reserves to spare. Russia had neither flexibility nor reserves, so when the war came, the empire collapsed inward, not because of revolution, because of insolvency. The Bolsheviks didn't destroy the Russian economy. They inherited the wreckage and the people who absorbed the cost, not the aristocracy, not the finance ministry, the peasants, the workers, the soldiers who were paid in worthless paper. The power didn't shift because of ideology. It shifted because the old system had already stopped functioning. This isn't ancient history. Every fixed exchange rate system faces the same trap. Credibility versus flexibility. When you anchor your currency to something scarce, gold, dollars, and other currency, you gain trust. But you lose the ability to respond to shocks. The European debt crisis, the Asian financial crisis, Argentina's peso collapse, same pattern, different century. Because the gold standard wasn't a relic of imperial arrogance, it was a trade-off. And Russia chose the wrong side. History doesn't repeat events, it repeats incentives. 2 lessons. First, monetary systems are not neutral. They distribute power, and when they break, they don't break evenly. Second, credibility without adaptability is fragility in disguise. Russia believed that tying itself to gold would make it strong. Instead, it locked the empire into a system it couldn't escape, even when survival demanded it. Because in the world of wealth and power, history never ends. It just changes hands. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon, because the next story might just change how you see power itself.